ever have someone come up to you and ask you the general question, will you help me? How do you respond to that? My guess is you respond exactly how I respond. I say, with what? Because I want to know exactly what they're asking of me before I commit to help them. And in that process, when someone asks you, you do this. Sometimes it's immediately in your head. Sometimes it takes some time. But you start to weigh all the sacrifices it's going to require. So you think about your physical energy or emotional energy or the time you have to commit to it. And then you also think about that person and the relationship you have. So a person that you're very close to might ask something of you that's a huge sacrifice, but you have a lot of relational history, and so you immediately respond, yep, I'm going to help you. Other people might ask things that are just more than you're willing to give to them. You don't have that relational connection, and so you might pass on that. And this is kind of a normal process of relationship in our lives. And I know we should be striving to always have a culture of helping other people, but this is a natural process in earthly relationships. But I think one of the problems with that is at times this is even how we respond to God when He commands things of us. He's not even asking, He's commanding for us as followers, but we respond the same way. God says, this is what I want you to do, and we go, what? And then we think about it, and we start to weigh the options of what sacrifice that's going to make. That's going to require a sacrifice of maybe it's my energy, maybe it's my time, maybe it's my resources like finances. And then we even weigh the relationship. And at times we might even think like, well, do I really have to do that? And if I do that, am I going to get in trouble? Is God going to punish me? And we go through this whole process. And instead of responding to God in the proper way, we actually put God on our level and we just start to weigh the options. You see, the response to God should always be the exact same. The response to His questions or His commands should always be, yes. Yes, I'll do it. Yes, I'll walk in obedience. Yes, I'll follow you. But instead what we do at times is we answer, what? What is it that you were asking of me? What is it that you're requiring of me? And then we weigh that process in our minds. And this is what we looked at this past weekend as we continued in the book of Luke. What we were looking at is really the way, the posture that we take with Jesus as He commands things in our lives. And this has been the ongoing theme through the chapter 8 of the book of Luke. In the beginning of chapter 8, which is, we taught this out of order just because of just kind of our scheduling with Pastor Chris teaching. But the week prior to this past weekend, we looked at the idea of the women who Jesus healed and He set free. So He healed them of sickness and He set them free from demonic powers. And their response to Jesus immediately was, yes. Yes, I will follow you. Yes, I will serve you. Yes, I will even financially support you. And then the part that came after that in chapter 8 is actually what Pastor Chris taught 2 weeks prior to this past weekend, if that makes sense. But Pastor Chris taught a powerful message looking at the parable of the seed in the soil. And what we saw in that is Jesus said that the seed represents His word being spoken to us. And it's the word with the assumption that it's the commands of God, the teachings of Jesus that we are to implement in our lives. And He says there's 4 different types. The first type of seed is the seed that produces no fruit, and that's because the person just simply does not understand it. They don't take the time to learn it and to really process what's being said. And He says, so no fruit is produced. The second one is the person who, as the seed falls, they just have no support system to help them. And so though they might receive it with joy, there's no support there. They're not connected in godly relationships in the body of Christ, and so they don't produce any fruit. The third person is a person who actually cares more about the riches of the world, their own pleasure, their own identity, than they do in respecting and honoring Jesus Christ. And so, again, they produce no fruit. But the fourth is the one who produces fruit. The fourth is the one who actually responds in obedience. And the reason is all 4 of them have a way of hearing, and the fourth person who produces is the person who hears the word of God with a good and honest heart. What that means is that person, before they ever hear a word from Jesus, already has their heart prepared to say yes. Their response is not a question of what is it that you're asking me. Their response is yes. A good and honest heart says, Jesus, I am ready to say yes. And that leads us to where we looked at this past weekend. As Jesus continued in this, He gave another kind of a parable looking, or kind of an analogy, an idea, and He said, here's what no one does in the physical. He says when someone is in a dark room and they have to light a lamp, He says no one lights the lamp to immediately cover it. The reason that you light a lamp is to illuminate a room. He says you don't do it to cover. It makes no sense. Or no one lights a lamp and then sticks it under a bed where the light can be blocked again. He says that is illogical. It makes no sense. But what he's implying is what is illogical in the physical for some reason becomes a reality in the spiritual. That we have this calling from Jesus to shine the light. And as it words it in Matthew, the light that we're shining is the salvation of Jesus in our lives that we shine through good works. So Jesus gives us the light. He is the light. We receive him in a free gift of salvation, but the calling is to take that light and through good works to shine it. But at times we say no. At times we cover the light of our lives. And there's many reasons we do this. One of the reasons that the initial reason that we want the light is, let's be honest for a second, we don't want to go to hell. I mean, that's the reason we want the light, is we don't want to go to hell. We don't want to spend eternity in punishment separated from God. And so that's where we begin. But the reason that times we cover the light is at times simply that we want to fake people out. We want to put on a mask. If we're around Christian friends, yeah, shine the light. If we're around people maybe that aren't Christians and they're doing things that are fun, even though we know in our lives we shouldn't be doing it, it's easy to put on the mask and to cover that light, and it just is what it is. We're embarrassed to actually proclaim Jesus. We're afraid of the consequences of what might happen if we do that. And then there's a third option. At times we're just simply selfish. At times we want to do what we want to do, and we really don't care about what Jesus wants us to do. And this is what Jesus was saying. He goes, what's illogical is if you really have a good and honest heart with Jesus, our response should be to always shine the light, to always be doing good works, to always be walking in obedience. It's just such a challenging passage. He goes on and he says, note this, all of your behavior is going to come to light. All of it is going to be exposed. And so if you think you can fake Jesus out and you can be ashamed of Jesus, I mean, his harsh warning to us in Matthew is, if you're ashamed of me, I'll be ashamed of you. Actually, it's also found in Luke, and we'll look at that in a couple of months. But he says, if you're ashamed of me, I'll be ashamed of you. All your behavior is going to come to light. It's illogical to think you can fake it at times. And then in verse 18, simply Jesus tells us, he says, I want you to understand there are consequences to your behavior. For the person who doesn't want to shine their light, who is ashamed of Jesus, he says, I want you to understand, if you honor Jesus, he's going to give you more opportunity. You're going to receive more of the blessing of that relationship. He says, but if you are not doing it, he says to the person who has nothing, even what he thinks he has, that will be taken away from him. That Jesus is telling us there are consequences to this. Now, lastly, then, the last part we looked at was just 3 short verses. And it was put there by Luke. In Mark's account, it was placed at a different spot. But Luke just wanted us to connect these thoughts. And Luke said there was a time that Jesus was at a place and his physical family came to see him. And Jesus used it as a teaching opportunity. So his physical family came to see him. And Jesus said to the crowds of those that were listening, he said, do you want to know who my real family is? My real brothers and sisters, my real mom and dad, my real family. He says, do you want to know who my family is? It's the people who hear and do what I tell them to do. Not just the people who hear, but those who hear and do. Now think about it. If there was anyone who had claimed to be in the family of Jesus, it would have been his mom and his siblings. But instead, Jesus says, I want you to understand this reality, something deeper. It's not about what you think gives you claim to being connected to Jesus, such as I go to church, I do Christian things. He says, here's what it is. It's the person who in their heart says yes to Jesus. The person who hears what he commands them to do and says yes and do it. Now I want to leave you with one final thought. What oftentimes in our lives gets boiled down to in our relationship with Jesus is this, is that we say, Jesus, I want to discover the bare minimum of what is required for me to still be saved. Now I know all of us at some point have asked ourselves that question or asked Jesus that question. We think, can I still do this and be saved? That is a heart that is not saying yes to Jesus in all areas. That's a heart that's saying, what? What is it that you're requiring of me? And I just want to switch and give you a different perspective. Can you imagine if I approached my wife, Mary, and I said to her, Mary, what's the bare minimum required of me, what I have to do to you for us to still be married? What if I went to her and said, now, how close can I get to another female before you would consider that adultery? How close can I get to this person before it would create tension in our relationship? I mean, all of you, even now as I say this question, and note this, my Connect group is watching this video too, so they're probably all glaring at me right now. But if I were to approach my wife that way with that question, all of you would say, Matt, that's a horrible question. That is a non-relational question to ask what's the bare minimum of what's required. See, the person who has a connection in relationship, a person who has genuine love, and in the context of what we're talking about with God, a person who has genuine faith is not asking Jesus for the bare minimum. They're asking Jesus, what is it that I can do to honor you? And that's the challenge for you in your Connect groups. As you look at your lives and you evaluate your lives, are you taking the posture that says to Jesus, what is it that I can do to honor you? And whatever you say, my response is yes. I'm praying for you. Hope you have a great discussion, and I can't wait to see you at one of our weekend services.